Today I'm going to be driving this thing. It is the Mazda MX-30. Now it's actually a very exciting time in the car world at the moment because lots of old school car companies are trying to catch up on the EV craze and they're releasing their very own electric cars. And Mazda is one of the latest of the old guard to release their first fully mass-produced electric car, the MX-30. And while on the outside it looks relatively normal, it is anything but ordinary, and I'm going to explain just why in just a moment. But before I get into the review, remember to hit the like button and subscribe because we've got plenty more awesome videos just like this one. End of the MX-30 is distinctly Mazda, and while most Mazdas have quite big grills at the front, this still retains the look of the likes of the CX-3 and the CX-5 SUVs. What is quite interesting though is that a lot of car makers at the moment, when they release electric versions, they almost block out the grille entirely, but we do have a small opening around here for some air to get into, and I'm going to touch upon why in just a little bit. You've got cladding all around the car, which gives it that kind of SUV rugged look. So if you are going through a particularly rocky car park, your paintwork isn't going to get damaged. All cars come on these 18-inch wheels, and they come with this kind of gunmetal finish. You can, however, if you want to, spec a black wheel. Again, they're 18 inches, but they're a slightly different design. We've got this two-tone effect going on here, which gives the car a slightly sleeker look. But what I find quite interesting is that it almost reminds me a bit of the Toyota FJ Cruiser. Now, we don't get that in the UK, it was sold in America, but I don't know what it is, it reminds me a bit of an FJ Cruiser. And like a lot of SUVs today, it has a everybody now coupe-like roofline. Yep, it slopes down at the back to give it a sportier look. I really like this bit as well. It says Mazda in metal down the side. A lot of back ends of Mazdas are really dull, but I think there's something exciting going on here. The tail lights look a little bit like eyes, and then this bit of bodywork here almost looks like an angry eyebrow, so it's kind of frowning at you as you're driving along. Maybe it's shaming you for driving a piston car. On to the first quirk of the MX-30, and it is a big one. Now remember the Mazda RX-8, which was that four-door coupe where the front doors open normally and the rear were suicide style? Well, the MX-30 is exactly the same. And as you can see here, there's no door handle at all to open the rear doors. We've got to open the front doors first, which come out at pretty much 90 degrees to the car. So you've got a big opening there. Now we reach into the cabin to open the rear doors. Now I can see a small problem here. If you're part of a family and you've got overly excited children, you might find one of them closes the front door prematurely. And then the other one in the back goes to close it, and then crunch. You have quite an expensive accident on your hands. Getting in the back isn't actually as difficult as some people are making out it to be, because this suicide just means that you have a lot of space to work with. So on this model, I have to pull a release for the chair here, and on the driver's side, it's electronically operated. So all I need to do is pull that, and it's a bit like a coupe. The front seat slides forwards, and then I'm in the back of the car. Now I've put this in my position that I thought would be quite comfortable. So let's see how much room I've got. Oh, it's tight. So headroom wise, I've not got a lot in all fairness. If I sit up straight, I've only got a few centimetres, and legroom is, well, almost non-existent. And I'd just like to point out as well that my feet are underneath the chair rather than comfortably behind them. So I kind of think the back is really only suitable for children. You do have ISOFIX points back here, and I think the suicide style doors might actually make it a bit easier to fit a child's seat. So if you're a parent, let me know down in the comments. Do you think this would be more simple? I think it would. We've actually got no connectivity back here, so if you do have adults or teenagers who want to charge a phone, there's not a lot they can do really. And a bit like a coupe, David, if you close the front door, I now can't get out. I've managed to get myself into the front of the MX-30, and wow, what an awesome place it is here. It's really unlike anything that I've seen before in a car. The layout is quite bizarre, but in a good way. I really like it. For instance, the center console, the actual control section, is elevated and raised towards you, so it almost looks like it's floating above the cabin. Now, what we have on here are some physical buttons, which I absolutely dig because they are easier to operate on the go than touch controls. And the infotainment itself is all operated through this rotary dial. Now, that might seem like a slight step back in time. Most companies have got rid of this now and are just relying completely on touch systems. But Mazda thinks that these infotainment systems are a bit too dangerous on the road if they are completely done through touch. So it gives you this dial instead. In fact, the screen doesn't actually work on touch at all. It all has to be done through buttons and the dial. And I quite like that. But moving a bit further forward, we actually have a touchscreen for the climate settings, which is cool because it makes it feel like a more futuristic car. And it actually kind of floats almost in front of the dashboard. So again, it just looks like it's a bit more airy. What's a little bit strange though is that you've got shortcuts to most of the buttons that are on the screen. So it almost makes you think, like, why is the screen there in the first place if all these buttons pretty much do the job? We've also got a nice wide infotainment screen on top of the dashboard, and it's the same size across the range. So no matter which trim level you go for, you get the same screen, although some offer slightly better infotainment options. Now, it's nice and straightforward. I really like it. It's the same system that is pretty much run on every other Mazda sold today. But it's nice and simple. It's not overly complicated. It's not full of sub-menus and settings. It just does the job. And if you're not a fan of it, just plug your smartphone in and you can access Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Not only is the design of the cabin a little bit obscure, but so are the materials used to kit it out. So we've got recycled jeans on the seats, and it feels very nice. We've also got part of the door trim here, which is recycled bottles. Doesn't feel like a recycled bottle, but it's pretty nice. You've also got vegan leather, which is a fancy way of saying it's fake leather. But it's vegan friendly and does feel pretty nice. Most normal people wouldn't really be able to tell the difference, in all fairness. There's also a lot of cork. Now, it's quite interesting because Mazda originated as a cork company in the early 1900s. So we've got cork around here, cork in this tray underneath the center console, and also a bit of cork on the door handle. That actually brings me onto storage because underneath these two cork topped flaps are two cup holders, and just get my trusty mug. That fits in there absolutely perfectly. There's a nice grip on there as well, so if you're driving around it might wobble a little bit, but not too much. We've also got a nice big tray underneath the center console with a couple of USB ports and also a 3-pin plug. So you could charge your laptop up if you wanted to, which is very handy if you can't work from home and you need to work from car instead. There's also a pretty decent storage bin underneath the armrest, which is admittedly quite dinky, but it is adjustable, so you can slide it forwards if you want to. And we also have a cup holder in the door. Now, accompanying the infotainment screen is this mostly digital virtual cockpit. So we've got a screen in the center which mimics an analog speedo, and it looks really good and really sharp. You can also see different bits of info as well. So if I were to press the info button, then I can go and see our efficiency, and I can also check out if we've got any semi-autonomous features active. I can view them on here. It's dead simple. There aren't lots of different sub-menus, a bit like the infotainment screen. It just gets the job done. And then either side of that, we've got two sort of analog dials. One shows how much power we're using and how much recharge we're using under braking. And then on the right-hand side, we can see how much power is left in the battery. Now, when the car is off, you can see that they are physical dials, but basically the car, just if I do it now, just goes completely blank. And then when I switch it on, they all light up, which makes it feel a little bit futuristic. Now, you're probably wondering, how much does this all cost? Well, it's not actually that expensive. So prices start at £26,000 for the SEL Lux, and that's pretty damn well equipped. But if you spend £2,000 more, you can go for the Sport Lux, and that adds in the vegan-friendly leather seats, as well as a slightly better infotainment system. Then you can go for the GT Sport, which is the one that we've got in here. That's £30,300, and it comes with a 12-speaker sound system, as well as automatic braking, accelerating, and steering under certain conditions. So it sounds like a bit of a bargain. Well, there's one small problem that I think we should get onto now. The MX-30 doesn't have a very big battery at all, really. It is a 35.5 kilowatt hour unit with a range of 124 miles. Now, that's about half of what you get on its major rivals like the Kia E-Niro or the Hyundai Kona Electric. But there's a reason behind it. So Mazda says that if you go for a smaller battery, it actually has a better environmental impact than if you were to go for a larger one. So all electric cars almost start off in debt because the actual production process can be quite costly in terms of emissions. And then they catch up with combustion engine cars over a certain period of time. Sometimes that's just a couple of years, other times it can be 5 years or 10 years. So by going for a smaller battery, Mazda is saying that it can essentially catch up and be more environmentally friendly than a piston engine car compared to those with bigger batteries. It also says the average European's daily drive is around about 30 miles, so why go for something really big? Not sure I really buy all of the logic, but it certainly explains why it's a smaller battery. We've also got an electric motor which is actually at the front of the car and not the rear. A lot of electric cars actually have them at the back. We've got them at the front here, and it develops 141 brake horsepower, which isn't a lot, and it has a 0 to 62 time of 10 seconds, which also isn't very electric. But as we'll find out in just a little bit, it doesn't actually feel that slow. It's still a pretty nippy car. What's really quite interesting though, when you're under the bonnet, is there's so much free space under here. I don't think I've ever seen a modern new car with just a big gaping hole, and you can see all the way to the back of the engine bay. And I believe that's because, well, soon you'll be able to get a range extender version of this. So you'll have a combustion engine motor that will just be able to eke out a bit more from the battery. And it needs somewhere to go, and I'm pretty sure it takes up the big space that's here under the bonnet. But still, it almost looks like a massive chunk of the car is missing when you open the bonnet up. The MX-30 has 366 litres of storage space back here. Now, that actually doesn't sound all that big. It's around about the same size as a VW Polo. But first of all, a Polo's got quite a big boot anyway. And secondly, you can actually get stuff quite far back in the MX-30. It's a little bit like a saloon car in that manner. And we've actually got more storage in here than you do on a Hyundai Kona Electric. Now, you also need to bear in mind that if you want to take your charging cables with you, they need somewhere to go. So we have 2 bags, and they're actually little clips at the back of the boot so they don't roll around, but they do take up a little bit of space. There's also some access to underneath the boot floor, but if you open it up, basically you just get some tools, and there's also the driver here for the 12-speaker surround sound system that you get on the GT Sport model. There's also no quick release for the rear seat, so if you want to fold them down, you've got to do it manually, but hey, it's a decent boot, it would do the job. One of the first things you'll notice when you turn a wheel in the MX-30 is it doesn't actually feel all that much like an electric car. First of all, there's a fake augmented engine sound in the background, and while a lot of electric cars kind of fake a UFO sound, or they almost sound quite synthesized, the MX-30 mimics what sounds like a petrol engine. And then there's the performance, which isn't by any means bad. It still feels like quite a brisk car, but it doesn't have that shove that a lot of electric cars have. It certainly gets a move on, but it doesn't accelerate like a lot of electric cars do. Although you do have quite a noticeable bit of performance going from 0 to 30. What's quite funny though is if you put your foot down coming out of a tight corner, you'll actually get a little bit of wheel spin and feel the smallest amount of torque steer, which is hilarious because that's kind of what old school hot hatches do. But here we have it in a front wheel drive electric SUV. Now, some people might think that the points that I've just mentioned are negatives about the car, and I think if you're after the full EV experience, then they might be. But if you're a little bit tentative about moving over to all-electric power, having a car that drives and feels a lot like a combustion engine car might not be a bad thing. And then you kind of think a little bit more about what Mazda usually brings to the market. And they tend to be drivers' cars. We drove the Mazda CX-5 recently, and you can watch that by clicking the link in the top right-hand corner. And while I felt some of its rivals were a little bit better, a bit more refined, it was a really great driver's car. The steering was fantastic, the body control was fantastic, all for a mid-size SUV, which just seemed ridiculous at the time. And the same can be said for the MX-30. This thing is really very fun to drive. A lot of electric cars feel ultra numb because everything is so electronic that it really detaches you from the road, but on the MX-30 it's got a lovely feel to it, and it just means that you can enjoy driving the car either on a twisty road or just feel a little bit sure behind the wheel. It gives you confidence. And I think what also helps the driving experience is because the battery isn't nearly as big in here as it is on rival cars, it feels light, or lighter than other electric vehicles. Let's talk about some of the tech that we've got going on here as well. I've got adaptive cruise control enabled. That's available on our GT Sport model, and what that's doing is essentially monitoring the speed of the car in front of me. If they slow down, I'll slow down as well at a gradual rate. We also have lane keep assistance on here, and it's active. So what that means is that while I'm driving along, let's say I'm on the motorway, what the car will do is it will just gently keep me in the centre of the lane, which is great if you're on a long motorway journey. The only thing I will say though is because the range is so small, remember it's 124 miles, are you really going to be doing that many motorway journeys? I don't know. If you do, the MX-30 is a superb cruiser. I've got a couple of paddles on the back of the steering wheel to play with, and they are for the regenerative braking. So if I press on the left paddle, I'll increase the regenerative braking. So when I lift off the accelerator, the brakes apply a little bit to recoup some of that energy and put it back into the battery. And if I pull on the right paddle, then we'll coast a little bit longer and come to a more gradual stop. And it's great fun because it gives you a bit of control over one pedal driving. So let's go for 3 likes and 3 dislikes. Like number 1, I really enjoy the way it drives, particularly for a crossover. This is a pretty drab class, but I've had quite a bit of fun driving the MX-30, so good job Mazda. Number 2, I love the design of the cabin. It is so cool and it feels kind of different. The layout is very different compared to what I'm used to, but I really dig it. And the third thing I like, even the entry-level car, which is £26,000, is pretty well equipped. The more you spend, really, the more luxuries you're getting, rather than getting something that's just crammed full of more features. And it's actually quite hard to tick options on the options list. 3 things I'm not a fan of. Number 1, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's the range. I do see the mentality behind it. Smaller battery, lighter car, also better for the environment. A lot of people aren't going to be driving really far in it, but it's still quite small. Number 2, the rear space is just not really that great. And the third thing is kind of value for money. And yes, it's well equipped. Yes, it's very different, but I think there are better value cars out there. Something like a Volkswagen ID3 and also a Hyundai Kona electric will give you more range and cost around about the same price. So a really interesting stab at your first proper full electric car, Mazda. It certainly feels very different, but it might be more niche than for the everyday electric car buyer.